Okay. Hi, welcome. Luckily, I always have one in reserve. This is this is actually very impressive. There are 26 people in this room, which I didn't know whether or not there would be a drop off or a pickup. Like you just don't know how this is going to be moving into technology. So this is really cool. So again, I am, for those who don't know me, I am Blake Wilson. I am apparently today's head dharma teacher. And um, this has been a really, and I know, like, this is almost like um, the topic just kind of serves itself up. But having been kind of in lockdown, in quarantine, has been an interesting experience. I think I naturally gravitate towards being an introvert anyway. So like the whole like getting out and hanging out with people and all that stuff. It's never been a huge drive for me, and so staying home like it's not that big of a deal. But it's just really interesting um, how when I was working out of the house, because I am still working, but when I was working outside of the house, I had a very set uh, pattern. So I would get up in the morning, use the restroom, meditate, shower, right? Start fixing, make sure the boy was up and getting dressed, fix breakfast, fix lunch, right? Go drop off William at school, go to work, right? Get a cup of coffee, right? So it was, it definitely had this schedule, and everything just kind of fell into place. And then even on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, they kind of developed their own schedule, if you will, a little bit more loosey-goosey, but it was definitely a lot more regimented. Well, since we started with kind of the lockdown, one of the first things we did, even before Lawrence public schools were, because they gave, like, I don't know if you know how it works. So there was spring break, and then KU as well as Lawrence public schools said, we are extending spring break for another week. We don't want you guys to come back. There are no classes. Just enjoy another week of spring break. Well, at that point, we set up a schedule primarily for my son. And it was primarily my wife who did this, though I signed off on it. I just, yeah, that looks good. And so, we set up this schedule, and at any point you can just look and see, what time is it, and then what's on the schedule, and this is what kind of we do next. And then, of course, after that, after another week, I think it's all just such a blur, but after another week of that, I ended up coming home and working from home, and loosely followed the schedule. But what I found very interesting, or what became very clear, was this whole change of schedule really made kind of my habits pop up. And so what I perhaps had thought of as this is how I do things was really more of me following a prescribed schedule that I had set for myself. So in some ways, I was masking my own karma, behind my schedule. So let me do a little needle here. And so now that my entire schedule has been shaken up, I can see my kind of my habits, my patterns, just my patterns really start to appear and really start to pop up, um, removed from my schedule. And so having to build a whole new schedule and having to kind of work from, kind of wipe the slate clean, if you will, really has changed things. Like for example, I don't meditate first thing in the morning anymore, because we sleep in later, and then the house is kind of a buzz. And it's not until after lunch, where we've actually worked in quiet time, that I meditate. And my son has actually started. He was here for a little bit, sitting with me. I'm impressed with how long he can actually meditate. He's 6. And I would say, well, a minute a year, so 6 minutes would be good for him. And he actually stayed for a good 10, 12 minutes before he decided to go off and play Legos. And so, you really hate, you really hate to, I really hate to, in such a situation, to kind of see the bright side, because this, like, it's beautiful that we are all staying home, like that we're all kind of sacrificing sacrificing kind of outside, kind of doing our stuff. We're sacrificing our schedules, if you will, for this horrible thing that's happening. And like I said, I hate to bring up, hey, look at the bright side. But really, for me, the kind of ripping away from the comfort of my previous schedule and having to find myself in a whole new, have to find myself a new schedule, has been great in a way. It's really, I feel like it's really strengthened my practice, and the ability to move to it was strengthened by my practice. Like I said, my son is now sitting with me, so he's a lot more interested. I have a little curriculum that I'm starting with him. And I imagine, now I've never done a retreat longer than 2 days. So I've never done the 5-day retreat. So I don't know if that's kind of what happens on these longer retreats. Even like a 90-day solo retreat, I don't know. Like I said, I've never done those. The thing that makes this kind of an all-in, kind of a buy-in, is we don't know the end of it. We don't know, if you're on a 5-day retreat, it ends in 5 days. You got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's over. And that may be the case. I don't know. Judy could speak more to the 90-day solo retreat. But those kind of have an end date. And I don't know if that really can affect things psychologically, or practice-wise. But with kind of this self-isolation, if you will, it's utter and complete buy-in, because who knows? It could be 18 months, it could be another month. We just don't know. And so, yeah, that's just kind of been my experience. In a way, it's been good for me, I think, to go through this. I'm excited to get through it, to get out the other side. I want to go to Worlds of Fun, but yeah, I'd say we're doing well, and it's beautiful to see so many people sitting with us. And thank you for listening to me ramble.
Thank you, Blake, for your talk, and to everyone for being here. When I woke up this morning, all of a sudden I missed my teacher, Zen Master Sung-san. Before I ask for questions, I'd like to talk a little about him. And in fact, the most efficient way I can do that is to read to you a reminiscence that I wrote when Zen Master Sung-san died in 2004. When he died, Buddha Dharma magazine asked me to write something about Zen Master Sung-san. Most of the other teachers were off in Korea at the funeral, so I think I was just the default person. So I'd like to read you what I wrote. The title was Spring Comes, the Grass Grows by Itself, Remembering Zen Master Sung, 1927 to 2004. I remember him best bowing. For years, he rose at 3 a.m. to do 500 prostrations before the regular 108 with the group at morning practice. He was a sturdy figure in his short gray bowing robe. His arms swung freely both on the descent and the ascent. His forehead pressed against the mat for a precise moment before he rocked forward on his hands to rise. Much bowing, he used to say. Your center becomes stronger and stronger. Once, before a retreat in Boulder, I asked him what he did when he sat. He told me he recited the great dharma over and over, very fast, one repetition per breath. Then your mind is like a washing machine on spin cycle, moving very fast. All the dirty water goes out, but the center is not moving. The great dharma, or dharma of great compassion, is a very long mantra, about 450 syllables. I asked him if he actually pronounced subvocally every syllable. He said he perceived every syllable, moment to moment. He was fond of the notion that in Buddhist psychology, moments of perception go by at about the same fraction per second rate that frames of film must be projected in order to create the illusion of motion. Our mind makes this world. He liked movies, especially Westerns and other action films. Once during a Kongan interview, he told me, "You must become a Western action hero." He liked the movie E.T. because the children and the alien were so compassionate to each other. But he thought the title character fell short of being a true bodhisattva because he was so preoccupied with going home. He himself was always on the road. By the early 1980s, he had Zen centers dotting the country and several others in Europe and Asia. He visited them all regularly. His energy was very strong then, perhaps due to special practices he did. Once, he stayed at our house in Kansas in a downstairs guest room. That night, my wife and I, in bed upstairs, listened to him yelling, blood-curdling yells. When dawn broke, we went downstairs and found him in the kitchen, bags packed and ready to be driven to the airport, drinking tea and smiling. "Many demons attacked last night, but I all drive away." And he explained the various Taoist yells he had used and how the feng shui of our town and the room on the side of the hill under the pine tree attracted demons and restless spirits. My wife, fearing her old teacher had lost his way, said, "These demons are all in your mind, Sansenyam." And as he opened the car door, he waved his stick and shouted up to her, "Yeah, you are correct, all in the mind, but you must understand this mind." He learned English when he came to this country in 1972 at the age of 40. He had received Dharma transmission from the brilliant, eccentric Kobang Sunim at the age of 21 and went on to direct temples both in Korea and in Japan. Kobang had told him, "I am the flower, you are the bee. You must spread this teaching throughout the world." So in 1972, he landed in Providence, Rhode Island, and began living with and teaching a group of Brown University students who had found him after they heard a Zen master was working in a local laundromat. Even though he took English classes at Harvard, his use of the language was always shaped by the directness and urgency of his Zen teaching. What are you? You don't know. So only go straight, don't know, always, everywhere. This don't know epitomized his style, a masterful use of colloquial English to translate in this case, the Chinese wuxin, no mind, and bring it to life, manifesting the concept and instilling it rather than explaining it. He taught us to breathe in, what am I? And breathe out, don't know. It became, for many of us, and certainly for me, the great question. He also told us, just do it, years before Nike started using the phrase, and don't make anything, and put it all down, and try for 10,000 years nonstop. These were not presented as slogans, but as sincere admonitions, always in the moment, no matter how often repeated. He was a master storyteller and delivered much of his teaching through stories, gesticulating and mugging his way through tall Buddhist tales, and becoming in turn a wise old woman, a proud but naive sutra master, a bewildered Manjushri, a stern Nam Chan killing the cat. Many of these stories can be found in his books, Dropping Ashes on the Buddha and Compass of Zen. But of course, it was his living presence that kept us enthralled. It was not just his energy. There was a dearness about him in everything he did, but especially when he spoke. Interviews with him were warm and clear, like water flowing into water, as Barbara Rhodes, Zen Master Song Hyang, put it. My first retreat with him was a 3-day Kido, a chanting retreat, in 1978 at a house on the coast at Big Sur. I helped him build an altar out of scrap lumber, and he placed on it a beautiful, delicate, ornate golden statue of Kuan Yin. When someone asked him why we're using such an elaborate statue for the retreat instead of a plain Buddha, he replied that Kuan Yin made herself beautiful to help all beings. We followed the standard retreat schedule, early morning until late evening. But instead of sitting, we chanted Kwanseum Bosal for hours on end, each of us equipped with a percussion instrument. Sun Tzu setting the tempo with a huge moktak, a fish-shaped drum. Assigned to clean his room during one of the breaks, I went in and found him not resting, but listening intently to a tape recording of the previous session, moving his lips. His talks during that retreat were all about the Bodhisattva of compassion, Kwanseum Bosal, and the spirit of compassion as the very heart of Zen practice. When you are thinking, your mind and my mind are different. When you are not thinking, your mind and my mind are the same. That is Zen mind. The name for that is Kwanseum Bosal, great love, great compassion, the great Bodhisattva way. He believed in chanting as the easiest form of practice and the best form of together action. His own chanting was like a great bell. It seemed to reverberate directly from his gut into ours. He was absolutely still when he chanted. When he was 21 years old, disenchanted with politics and philosophy, he undertook a 100-day solo retreat in the mountains, chanting with a moktak 20 hours a day, taking cold baths at night in a mountain stream, and eating only pine needles. At the end of the retreat, he wrote this poem. The road at the bottom of Wangak Mountain is not the present road. The man climbing with his backpack is not a man of the past. Tok, tok, his footsteps transfix past and present. Crows out of a tree, caw, caw, caw. His diet on that retreat may have given him the diabetes he had to cope with the rest of his life. It did not slow him down. It was simply another vehicle for his teaching. He always spoke of his body as a rental car. And he would say that when something is ripe, it will soon be rotten. For the end of his life, he was given the title Daejong Sa, Great Elder Teacher, the highest title bestowed by the Chogyek Order. When he was presented with the accoutrements of this position, he said, "This whisk is heavy." The last time I heard him teach was at a precepts ceremony at the Kansas Zen Center. As usual, he told two stories to illustrate the importance of correct direction, knowing when the precepts are open and when they are closed. First, he told the story of Hae Chung, a precepts-keeping monk who would not even uproot grass in order to save his own life, and was made national teacher by the emperor in recognition of his virtue. Then he told the story of Nam Chan killing the cat, a kongan that has opened many Zen students' minds. When he came to the part of the story where Joju puts his sandals on his head, he took the brass handbell from the table and put it on his head. Balancing it there, he looked at the Sangha serenely and said, "So, keep precepts, become national teacher. Break precepts, become great Zen master. Which one do you like?" He always left us with a question. But when Subong Sinim, his Dharma heir who died in 1994, asked him, "What is the shortcut to Zen?" he answered, "Not for me." This was how he lived his life. Not for himself, but for all beings. The poem on the precept certificate reads, "Good and evil have no self-nature. Holy and unholy are empty names. In front of the door is the land of stillness and light. Spring comes, the grass grows by itself." Well, we only have a few minutes left. Thank you for listening.
If
Judy?
anyone has any questions, this is the time to ask them. So unmute yourself to ask a question. Thank you.
I have a question. So you mentioned the Great Dharani, and actually had a question about that coming into practice today. I'm not too familiar with, as I've been practicing sort of my chanting on my own, I'm not too familiar with the meaning of it, and are there any translations of it? I see that that's one of the ones that doesn't have any words below it. So I guess my question is, what's sort of the meaning of the Great Dharani, and do we have any translations of it?
Yeah, the Dharani is a very long mantra, and the words have no meaning. You can actually find an attempt at translating it in a book by Zen Master Hae Kwang. The syllables all sound like standard, and they were originally, standard Sanskrit syllables. And since they are syllables in Sanskrit, you can jam them together and perhaps make up words, but most scholars think that's bogus. It's simply sound. So most mantras are pure sound too. The mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra is an exception to that. The gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond, awake. So think of it as a magic spell. That's what a dharani is. The sound itself is efficacious by the very vibrations it sets up in your consciousness. So that's what a dharani is. The Great Dharani, I chanted the Great Dharani 100 times a day for 100 days once. So at first it took quite a while, but I kept going faster and faster and faster and faster. I don't know if I ever was going as fast as Zen Master Sung was going, but I couldn't get through it in one breath. Almost, but not quite. Thank you for your question. It's a wonderful practice.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
So do you have any announcements?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the YouTube thing. And maybe, Blake, maybe we should stop the recording now. People could unmute themselves and go to the